Thanks very much for having us. We're very excited to be here. My name's Trent Lloyd. I'm co-founder of Eyeota. I'm joined by Jesse, who's our Director of Activation Insights and Analytics, and Priya, who's our Senior Manager of Strategic Accounts. Just a little bit of background on us before I hand over to these guys to take you through some slides. We have been around for about 5.5 years. I suppose if you're going to put us in a bucket, we're in the advertising MarTech space. We have a platform of our own. We are not a data management platform or a CRM, and we don't do retargeting. Our role in the world is to collect and curate what is now thousands of segments of targeting profile data. And we make that available to advertisers inside of the media buying platforms that they already use globally. So the role we play is to allow advertisers to target specific audiences that are important to you based on demography, purchase intent, interests. We also have branded data sets integrated into the platform as well from partners such as CSEI, Kantar, Experian, Roy Morgan, Bombora, and others. So over the next few minutes, Jesse and Priya will put this in the context of your business by way of some case studies and use cases, helping you understand the role that targeting profile data, how to access it and use it properly, how that can make a difference in your business. Thank you.
Hello, thank you for having us today. So we made this very simple, as Trent mentioned. We will be around tomorrow to go into a lot more detail with any one of you who might find this to be relevant for your day-to-day or different team members. It can be very general or very specific, very customized and tailored. So we're happy to speak to you when you have time.
3 steps to building a relationship with your audience. Let's get started. Before we go into the
steps, just to explain why are we here today, why is this relevant for you guys? It's really around really incredible growth we're seeing globally in APAC, Southeast Asia, all the markets we operate in, Vietnam, Thailand. We have an office here in Singapore, actually headquartered here. So we're seeing a lot of growth in audience data usage across all types of brands, but in particular in the FMCG sector, it's seen significant growth over the last year or so, and it's more than tripled in the last year, and that's being driven by all markets simultaneously. And now it's actually ranked 6th out of all of the different types of advertiser brands that would use audience data, like automotive, finance, electronics. FMCG is now 6th. And when we talk about FMCG, we are including multinational brands that have a lot of different products, as well as packaged goods and specialty drinks, beauty, and personal care. So Kimberly-Clark would have brands that fit really into all of those, except for maybe the drinks. And we can really tailor the approach for all of these. So a few highlights. As Trent mentioned, I look after analytics and insights, so that's what I'll be talking to you about. This is just to give you an idea of, firstly, the global view we have on how audience data is being used, so we can really help you with your customized approach. And secondly, our transparency, or our willingness to be transparent with our own data to help you better understand, what segments should you be buying, in what markets, what is the most relevant audience data segments we can provide you for, or user profiles. So we mentioned the global rank, and then just a few kind of the key markets are UK, Australia, Germany, and the US at the moment, but that's changing as we get Southeast Asia included more in the FMCG sector. You can see most bought segment categories on my left. So a lot of sociodemographic. 40% is quite high for an advertiser sector. We normally see a more even split there across our different categories. And that's because FMCG brands tend to seek out broad sociodemographic segments, like gender, like fashion interests, like parents, decision makers. These are not very, very niche. They're not in-market intent segments, much, much broader. And we'll talk more about why why that is, but just keep those in mind that we have relevant segments with more scale and relevant to your target audience. What else can I tell you? The subsectors we mentioned already, you can see it split. A lot of FMCG general, then some packaged foods as a number 2 kind of type of brands using audience data. These are our global stats, but if anyone's interested, we can always share our regional stats as well. So, using the right channel, I'll turn it over. Would you like the clicker?
So, hi everyone. We want to talk about how audience data can be used for Kimberly-Clark and for your brands. And it's important to understand what are the key pillars, and one of them is using the right channels. These are some of the stats that I want to take you through for programmatic and what we've seen in the FMCG industry. We see that nearly 2/3 of all digital ad spends today were spent programmatically, and this was in 2015. So we've seen that trend move to APAC as well. It used to be more so in the US, but we're seeing things move. And one of the key brands who have done that is P&G, for example, who've spent almost 75% of their budget last year on programmatic. So 75% of their digital ad spends went to programmatic, which also gave them 3 to 5 times greater ROI. And this is coming from programmatic as compared to other traditional channels. So we're seeing that tide also in all of the APJ markets, move to Southeast Asia, Korea, Japan, India as well. And Australia has always been a big market adopting programmatic in the last few years. Talking about, why is that happening is because that's where your audience is. We see, and I've just picked up Singapore as one of the markets here to see how much time are people spending on different media channels versus what is the budget that's allocated to all the channels. But we can pull this out. I mean, being conscious of time, we haven't done that for each market here, but that's something that we do regularly. And looking at the internet, media time spent is almost 40% in Singapore, whereas we see 45% of the budget is still being spent on print in the Singapore market. So it's quite, variation in terms of where the money, where the budgets are allocated. So what we can do is we can help you sharpen your marketing strategy using audience data. And we've used, the Byron Sharp book that he wrote. We're seeing that we work with a lot of agencies and brands across. And we're seeing a lot of large multinational FMCG brands have started to adopt Byron Sharp and the recommendations that he has for FMCG clients. And we've seen that what he talks about is he suggests that it's more of a broader audience for FMCG because you need a large customer base to target. And we definitely know that targeting is important, and you have to target, but not go very, very niche, because FMCG is a sector that needs to reach out to everyone. And I'd like to bring out a stat here of 75% of Coke consumers would also buy Pepsi. What does that mean? That means is that you need to be in front of the consumers' mind, and it has to be always on. So your marketing strategy needs to be tailored to the audience you want to reach. Keep it broad, but always have an always-on strategy. So that is what we've seen a lot of FMCG advertisers do in all parts of the world. And we can get you that scale. So just to share a few numbers in terms of where data is really strong in what parts of APAC. And we see very, very strong data in ASEAN 6, all of Malaysia, Thailand, Vietnam, over 30 million users. We see Japan and Korea quite strong as well. We've got a very, very strong base in Japan of over 40 million, and Australia and India over 40 million as well. India is over 50 million. So that's the unique user profile base in each of these markets. that you can target, and which includes, as Trent mentioned, demographic data sets, intent, interest, different kind of data sets that you can buy, which is, again, layered in all the programmatic campaigns that can be run. The second thing we do want to talk about is knowing your audience. It's easy to say that, yes, let's go programmatic and put 75% of your budget on programmatic. But the challenge today for programmatic is that it could be non-human traffic. And that's a big challenge that programmatic faces. And how we can address that is by using audience data, because the fraudulent traffic that you would get, but that would be your target audience, and it's actually humans. So we help bridge that gap for advertisers to reach out to actual human beings and not just fraudulent things. So if we put this into context for a brand, and we've picked up Huggies here, how do we do that? How create a use case? We're looking at the product Huggies. Your target audience is women in the age group of 25 to 35, mothers, to-be mothers, pregnant women. But how do we reach out to this audience? And also in terms of, should we just look at these demographics, or is there something more that we can look at to reach out to a broader set of your customer base? And what we would look at is, in context to Huggies, we would look at all of these data signals. So declared demographic data, which is where people go and declare their information on e-commerce sites or fill up registrations forms online. We collect all that data, so we know that this is very, very accurate data that we have. We've got inferred signals as well, where we're looking at browsing behavior data and statistically modeled data in terms of what is the behavior exhibited online by users. So, a user might go to a dating site and look for males, and they did that, had that same behavior 3 or 4 times, then we would put them in the inferred signal of being a woman. So that's how we collect all the data signals. Lifestyle segments here. It's again browsing behavior data of people consuming niche content. So in this case, mothers to be, motherhood. That would be the lifestyle segments that we would create based on behaviors exhibited. And interest would again depend on the content that's consumed. So we would look at parents, and we would put them under that category because they've gone and consumed content on parenting, on how to bring up a baby or look for information about babies. So we would then categorize them in the interest audience data segments. We also have some branded data partners, which Trent mentioned before, and that's about how do we use that information relevant to a Huggies brand or to a Cortex or Depend, is by looking at what kind of information do we have which is not online, could be offline, from offline sources as well. And we have a partner called Experian, for instance, just naming one, where they collect census data. So we know that these are households with children, these are households with younger children, or contemporary homemakers who are looking to start a family. So we've got this data from census reports, offline sources, survey forms. So that's the kind of data we integrate as well into the online space. And what we would then recommend is a much broader mix. So broader mix than just going after women 25 to 35, but people who are actually interested in consuming that mothers-related content or parents-related content, people who fall under contemporary homemakers or households where we know that there are younger children, probably 6 months old or a year old. So that's the kind of segmentation we would then recommend. What we could also do is go a step further and understand your audience and build, give you more attributes about that audience. So that is something that we have from all the data that we've collected and our methodology, our back-end methodology. And where can you find this data? So we do have a dashboard. We have a dashboard where you can go ahead and find parents, and it will give you all the segment recommendations, the volume numbers of seeing if there is scale in a certain region or not. what are the partners that you could get that data from. So it is very, very transparent, and we can share that dashboard with you. We can also recommend different segments to you. Just to put that into perspective, and I want to share a case study here. We've done this case study with a consumer electronic brand, and they wanted to reach out to males in the ASEAN 6. And what we did here was we see the strength of audience data, which was very effective in driving these video completions. So because the audience was so relevant, they managed to watch the video right to the end. And it's compared to the benchmarks that you would see for video completion rates, as well as contextual targeting, because they reached out to people interested in sports, assuming that that would have more of the male user profiles included. But it's not very accurate because anybody could be reading about sports. But when we compare the audience data, we saw a 61% video completion rate. They also ran a brand study, and they saw that brand awareness went up by 1%, which is quite significant for a consumer electronic brand. So that's quite high for them, and they were very happy with the brand preference as well that went up by 0.8%. So I will pass it on to Jessie to take you through.
I thought you were going to throw it at me.
Customize your approach.
Great. So I want to take you through this case study. I love this case study because I think it pulls together everything we've been talking about. So using the right channel, knowing your audience, and then customize your approach. And audience data through the digital programmatic medium enables you to do all of those things. This is a case study that ran in Australia for a premium airline company. And the agency was having a hard time increasing ticket sales over a year without moving the dial. So something had to be done. They had to really look under the hood and reevaluate the strategy of this campaign to stop doing the same thing over and over again, right? So customize their approach more. And what they did is they looked in detail at their target audience by ticket, by price of the ticket, right? So you have your first class, business class, economy. They looked at their offline research. What do they know through their CRM, through offline knowledge of their customers and passengers. They looked at previous campaigns in all medium and also through digital. And then they looked specifically at all the audience data signals they had to come up with their perfect target audience at the different ticket level. And they customized the campaign strategy for each one of those. Instead of having the same conversation with every single potential customer, they tailored it based on what they knew about the user. And they found, obviously, this to be very successful, or I wouldn't be telling you about it. But they not only spent more on audience data, which is great for Eyeota, so 50% more spent to audience data, but what was really great is that the entire campaign strategy and performance improved, because audience data is not a siloed strategy. It works together with all your other strategies, everything else, all your other marketing efforts. And the most optimal strategies are ones that include and combine these. For example, retargeting with audience data is much more effective than on its own. And they found that the overall ROI for a campaign that hadn't moved the needle in over a year was 9%. That's actual ticket sales increased. And that's because they were using the right channel, right? Their users were purchasing the tickets online. That's where their audience was. They learned about their audience and spoke to them specifically and targeted their approach to customize each conversation. And, a sidebar off of that, this agency then felt comfortable and confident with this knowledge to increase their entire audience data strategy by 260%. So kind of went on all of their campaigns. And the client was, of course, very happy with this. So this was run out of Australia, but they were targeting travelers all over APAC. So just to bring back Byron Sharp, because I love this book, How Brands Grow, and we've actually just released a really great white paper going through all of these points, and especially the Byron Sharp elements, because we kept hearing all of our multinational FMCG brands coming to us and saying, we just read this great book. It's nothing new. It's been around since 2010, but they wanted to start finally adopting these marketing strategies in the programmatic space, which is what is slightly new and different about this. So, Priya spoke you through the market to the masses. Your audience is extremely broad. You want Kleenex and Scott to be in every household, not just a very specific niche demographic, right? High income or low income. You want it to be everywhere. So you've got to be broadening your customer base, and you have to be talking to them all the time. I love the comment about promiscuity of women or of mothers in Australia. The way to counter that is always on, be in constant communication with your customers, not just when they first have the baby, but throughout, so that it's front of mind. The difference between whether you buy Coke or Pepsi is the last brand that had a conversation with you. So this is why we refer to FMCG brands as kind of constant eaters. We were hungry when we came up with these, but basically it's to help understand that you can customize every brand, and every type of advertising sector uses audience data differently. There's not a one-size-fits-all here. That's what's so great about it. You can really be dynamic and tailored with your approach. And we put FMCG in constant eaters because of that need to have a broader audience, less niche, and be consistently communicating. So this graph shows that, as well as another point I want to make. So FMCG is a consistent spender, but you also have the flexibility and the ability to change up your spend depending on seasonal events. So I don't know what the seasonal impacts are for, Huggies, but generically for FMCG brands, we see back to school having a massive impact on sales and therefore advertising and marketing, as well as end of year sales. So, your Christmas, Chinese New Year, New Year's. So you can still, although you might have an always-on approach, have the flexibility to increase at certain periods of time throughout the year. So these are other seasonal trends we see. This is part of the quarterly Eyeota index report. So whenever you want most up-to-date insights on audience data usage, it's really a juicy read. We are really transparent with this kind of information. So Q3, you see FMCG, as I mentioned. Other seasonal ones are travel and leisure. In Q1, a lot of people are booking their holidays for the rest of the year. So we see an increase there in travel brands. Another one is government elections. That was specifically for the UK elections in Q1 of 2015. And we're seeing it again now with the US elections starting already at the end of last year and continuing through. So types of brands like that are quite seasonal, we call them binge eaters. Really because they're not always on. They're not following Byron Sharp's strategies and suggestions, but it's because that's what works for them. They have a specific period of time they need to be having a conversation with their audience, or they're only relevant for a particular period in the year. So government organizations, again around those elections, they could be big elections like the political elections of a new government, or it could be smaller things like a new law that you want to get voters in for. Education advertisers around key university application periods are increasing their spend. Finally, the last kind of personality that I wanted to tell you about was picky eaters. These are brands that have a much longer decision process, and the return on investment is much, much higher. Things like automotive and finance. When you buy a car that's a big ticket item, it takes you a while to decide, and they have very, very clear idea of who their target audience. They're not trying to get their BMW in every garage in Singapore, though they would love to. They know that's not possible. So they're going to go after the most relevant audience for them. And that'll be very different for a luxury car versus a more family car. And audience data enables you to target very specific household or types of households that would be relevant for your brand. So in summary, we talked about really 4 key points. Firstly, audience data usage is so over triple in FMCG. That's just for the one sector we're telling you about today. We're seeing that across the board and in all markets. The most important thing is to use to be where your users are, be where your audience is, which is increasingly online. We saw in Singapore over 40% of your customers' time is being spent on the internet. So that's where your investment in marketing should be. Know your audience. You don't want to waste your marketing dollars on just anyone, and you want to have a clear idea of who you want to have that conversation with, and customize your approach based on that audience. And that's it. Thank you. I think I kept to the time. Any questions? Yes. I'll just ask. Yes, my teammates join.
Can pass the microphones? Oh, sorry. Can pass the microphone? Oh. No, let me just... No. I'll pass the microphone across. No worries.
So I think when you start to talk about So, is the application better for an always-on broader audience, or helping us look at a mum-to-be versus a mum of a 3-year-old, a 3-month-old, versus a mum of a 6-month-old, versus a mum of a 9-month-old? So, as you think about the application of your business model, is it better to open the aperture of the lens wider and attract more people in, or does it really help us in terms of knowing your audience to get into subsegments of our group where the business challenge that we've talked about this morning is we lose people every time mum changes size as baby grows? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yes, I think there has to be a tailored approach, and it really depends on the products. So Kotex and Huggies would be a very different approach to a Kleenex product. So we also spoke about, when we spoke about Huggies, that yes, you need to go targeted to mothers, but then at different stages of, as we call it, the life cycle. So it is a mother-to-be, or who is already a mother of a 6-month-old and would want to be a mother again after, say, 2 years. So it has to be top of the mind. You always have to stay at top of the mind kind of approach. So always on is required, but also targeted for products.
Yeah. You want choices. So
you're telling me to do both. You want choices. I don't want to be talking to a mum who might be a mum in 2 years' time.
Yeah.
I'd like to be talking to a mum as baby grows, or am I better off talking to broader audiences like Kleenex and bath tissue where I want to be always on? So am I better going one or the other? Well,
you would do it differently for those two brands. With the premium airline example, they initially were very broad, and then they tailored it back once they learned which audience was most relevant. They were obviously measuring actual sales online, so very, very easy to measure there. What I would advise is that you would start broad and learn from the information we see with similar brands. And then as you start to realize, because we would be able to tell you these users try this instead and go down to a subcategory at that point to then start tailoring it more. But I would ask you, does it matter if you're speaking to mothers in general and pregnant women now? What's the difference in your brand impact and your sales impact if you're speaking to a mother of a 2-month-old and a newborn? Is there an actual difference there for you? Sorry?
You want to know what your platform is better at. You got to pick A or B. Are you better at a broad approach or very?
Well, that's why we showed you the different personalities. We can do both. We can go broad and specific. All our segments are very different. Which is better? Well, I
think there might just be a little bit of confusion here because you're not licensing our platform per se. We're not here pitching ourselves as a data management platform. We collect and curate this audience targeting data, which sits within 70 plus other platforms, largely demand-side platforms that your agencies are using to set up and run campaigns already. So really, our job is to get and collect and organise and make available the best possible data and inform you guys about that so you can make the best choices on how to use it most effectively. Like another example that may be relevant, I remember talking to Foxtel in Sydney last year, I lose track of time, when they, not long after they engaged Crux as their data management platform, we put our data into most of the DMPs, including Crux, and they ended up with a couple of broad brushstroke strategies, one of which was they wanted to see what the data sets we have had in common with their existing premium Foxtel subscribers, so that they could then turn around and look to Eyeota to provide the reach by programmatically to be able to target more like for like to try and get more premium level subscribers. However, at the same time, they're also looking to bring people in at the kind of cheaper end of the subscription funnel as well. So people who just want to mainly consume, guys who just want to mainly consume sport and get the cheapest possible package of sport plus whatever. So where I'm going is, it's the insights to some extent. It's a combination of your side of the table and ours. And how our data is used at the end of the day is a decision that's made by the agency and the advertiser. What we're trying to do is share examples and contexts of how other people have used it. And the other thing we're always doing is signing up more and more branded partners and sites to provide us with more data so that we've got even more segments, but most importantly, deeper scale in the thousands of segments we've already got.
Any more questions?
Yeah, it's one over here.
Hi guys. I understand that you hold over 1 billion unique profiles of audience data. That's quite clear. But how do you guys fit in programmatically? Like, we already have a programmatic budget, and where sometimes content acts as proxy for people. But what are you exactly saying? Are you going to follow the people and advertise wherever they are sort of surfing? Or how do you use that audience data programmatically?
So how we would use is we are integrated in the programmatic platforms already. And when you're setting up a campaign through the programmatic channel, you would then choose what target audience you want. So your ads will then be shown just to that set of target audience and not to everyone. So that's how you would be using audience data as an additional layer to reach out to the right audience through the programmatic channels. And that's the targeting you can set. What we also do is, as you know, we took the Huggies example, was recommend that you might just want to reach women in a certain age group, but we could also tell you that, okay, you could use other interest segments as well, which fit your target audience.
Hi, we already use quite a bit of your audience targeting in Australia. I have an interesting query, and I don't know if you can answer it. Do you one day see the possibility of having enough audience data and insight that would allow us to be able to curate the type of creative that we present to them programmatically? i.e., it's very important for us to communicate to a mum of a newborn quite differently to someone who's going through toilet training. They're very different types of messages. However, within those types of segments, we also have mums who are very price conscious, mums who want best for baby, and mums who are very social and love to share things. I can imagine that programmatically, while it's important to find those specific segments out there and to serve them an ad, I think that some of the challenges that brands are having is actually serving relevant creative as well, because it's nice to actually find those people, but I think one of the key challenges, particularly from a programmatic point of view, is the fact that we serve them the same type of creative, even though we found these different segments. So what are you guys seeing out there that brands are actually doing differently, where they're able to use the type of information you guys have to actually infuse the type of creative engagement that they're actually sending out there?
Absolutely, and one of the good points, positive things about using audience data is you know who the audience is, so you tailor your message accordingly. And Jessie shared the airline case study, which was very much relevant to your question. Is what we did there was they tailored the messaging for business class users depending on the kind of audience profiles, which are high net worth individuals, probably working in C-suite job roles, and then serve them the business class ads rather than serving the business class ads to everyone. And then we tailored the other messaging for the economy and other promotions to another audience. So it was the messaging was tailored to the kind of audience we were serving it to.
Yeah, I mean, what you're talking about is exactly where we want to go. Like, that's the dream vision, is having granular segments, and we see advertisers who tailor the messaging accordingly. That's the dream. One of the challenges in a lot of countries, obviously it's different, say, the scale of the US versus Australia, is the more niche you go with a particular profile, the fewer browsers you're going to have to target, and it becomes a little bit more difficult to make it meaningful from a scale perspective, to go to that trouble of creative and all the rest of it. One thing I will let you know we're doing, though, which is early days, we've got 5 or 6 brands, I think, doing this now in Australia, is something we're calling site optimization, which is where brands are running our tag on their site and we're returning to them. So it's almost a reverse relationship to what we have with a normal publisher who provides data to us. The brands are not sending anything to us. When we see a user on their site that we have seen somewhere else, we're actually passing back to that brand some data points that we know about that user. That brand is then using that in their content management system to customize the content they're showing on their website to that visiting browser. So that's really interesting stuff, which is pretty new. Essentially, it's allowing you as a marketer to change and tailor the content on your site with the same kind of marketing mentality that you would have from an ad targeting perspective. So that's happening right now. To your point, it's customized messaging based on who's visiting their site.
Yeah, so just to build on that, actually, I was wondering, is it possible then to actually link the database records you have, so your known audience, with this kind of like the anonymous records that you have?
Sorry, link our anonymous records with?
So basically the people that we already have in our database, right? We know who these people are, we have them in our CRM. To a degree, we might know what they're buying. Are you then able to follow them around and target content based on what we know about them?
Well, that gets a little bit tricky, because we live in a world of privacy compliance, and we don't carry or collect any personally identifiable information. The best method to do that is through a matching of hashed personal information, like a hashed email address or a hashed phone number. Really, outside the US, that is not happening yet. Even LiveRamp, which Axiom acquired 18 months ago, For example, they came to Australia and have had 2 attempts to build that and have essentially exited stage left because it's very difficult to build scale, and we could talk about that for another hour. But I think a big factor in that is social media and the fact that most people go to a website where there's an option to sign up or log in with their email or through social media, and they'll go through social media. So essentially Facebook is collecting all of that, and the thousands of publishers are not. We do collect hashed emails. We started doing that 4 or 5 months ago, almost as a bit of a side project, and it is a challenging one to build scale in short term, because even for a publisher with 2 million visitors to their site a month who collects email, you'll see oftentimes literally single-digit thousands. So to build that scale for you to achieve that, pretty difficult. Otherwise, am I forgetting anything in terms of how we can possibly identify cookie for cookie someone in their database versus us?
We could tag up their site. We can collect those users, and then any other time we see them, we would be tracking them, and you would see it in the DSP, but the scale would be quite small. I mean, how many users go to your site? That would be the scale we would be dealing with.
A lot.
Like thousands, millions?
Hundreds of thousands, just for, speaking of Vietnam.
So whatever number you are working with and whatever information you would have, we would be able to build on the data points, but not on the users, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So just on that, so Jesse's here talking about people going to your site. You were referencing your database, for example. Another option would be if you were running something like, for example, a competition, or you're putting out some messaging with an incentive to people in your database to drive them to a destination, and maybe it's a competition page you've set up or something. If we tag that page, or if you tag that page with our pixel, that would be a way for us to collect them and get our cookie on them. And that allows us to do a couple of things. That allows us to see what other sites they go to and collect data points about. And it also allows us to, we already know where they've been before and what data points we already have about them.
Okay. We have one more questions. Anyone?
Also, any heuristic or guidance for creative development. And from that I mean, for example, as you run multiple campaigns and you have indicators of different campaigns that have resulted in, say, brand uplifts or brand preference or brand cut-through building up. And is there the possibility of almost saying that there could be certain heuristics, in especially markets like where it could be multi-ethnic or by different demographies? What are the certain rules of thumb for developing powerful creative? For example, different emotive chords. Are they very functional-led creative messaging, or very emotive-led, or resulting in, you know what I mean? Is there any kind of inciting and rules of thumb or heuristics that you managed to collect with all that data?
So we don't always get the creative information. So we won't necessarily know what the creative, unless we have a conversation, do a case study. But our data is being purchased every second through DSP, so we don't always have visibility on the creative. But something that is interesting that I'm pursuing for markets where we have really good coverage, like Australia. So you saw on the map it said 14 million, but that's actually one of our deepest data sets. That means for each one of those unique user profiles, we have multiple data points. We know many things about the user. Whereas in some markets where we might have more users, there'll be fewer data points per user. And we can start to think about, what do we know about the population or the online population about Australia? And that type of insight, we will start to publish once we feel we have a good baseline for the market. And doing things like looking at the users you've targeted versus the ones we see for Australia as a whole, and tell you how you are different or how they are differ from those. But currently it's not something, like from a research perspective, we haven't been approached to do a lot of that yet, because it's more targeting in real time as opposed to looking back.
I'd just like to add to that is we can build case studies. So if advertisers like you are ready to share that data back with us, we're then able to analyze, what was it that worked, or, if we look at other options like looking at more data points about your users, we can do that if you share that data back with us. So that's something we can work closely with you and build a case study out of. And we've started to do that in APAC with a lot of advertisers now, of building case studies, getting data back from them, and analyzing what's working, what's not, and how they can tailor the messaging accordingly.